welcome back to our live stage in Barcelona, and a huge good afternoon to our audience, both in person and virtual. For those of you that are joining us today, my name is Chloe Richardson, and welcome to Cloud City Live. Now, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome our next keynote speaker. Owning a network allows brands to enjoy invaluable customer insights and intelligence by unlocking the holy grail of customer information, telecom data, up there as one of the most precious global commodities. OXIO is an innovative mobile carrier as a service built on one simple but bold premise. Telecom is on the verge of a colossal structural change, shifting from the current carrier model to brands building deeper customer connections by offering branded mobility services. So Nicolas Girard is the CEO and founder of OXIO and is leading the revolution for brands to natively offer wireless connectivity to both their users and their customers. Passionate about doing his bit to get people better connected, Nico is joining us on stage to tell us more about how OXIO delivers the essence of being the carrier to brands by a simple SaaS system, which unleashes its fully programmatic cloud-based network, blending the existing infrastructure from current operators. So the biggest question with Unbundling Telecom: what's on the other side? And before Nico comes up to the stage, don't forget, if you miss any of our keynote speakers or simply want to watch them again, Cloud City Online is the place to go. All of our content sessions can be found there at the end of each day, and we already have all of yesterday's up and ready for your enjoyment. Simply check out the on-demand video section whenever you like. But for now, please join me in welcoming Nico Girard up to the stage. Thank you so much, Nico. Over to you.
Cheers. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for Telco DR to having us here. So let's talk about unbundling telecom and what's on the other side. So a lot of people talk about unbundling telecom, not always very clear what that means, and usually a lot less clear what actually is on the other side. So first, I'll talk about what OXIO does. So we invented telecom as a service. So as Chloe was giving us in the introduction, we're basically the first platform to offer a 100% software cloud hosted in the public cloud telecommunication as a service, basically at a high level, giving brands and enterprise the opportunity to become a mobile operator by just having to implement a simple API. So sometimes we refer to it as the Stripe of telecom, to kind of give you a high level overview of what it is. So the difference with us is we're basically leveraging existing networks. So we connect with mobile providers across LTE, across 5G, across Wi-Fi, satellite, backhaul, mesh networks, anything effectively that can connect a mobile device. And then we implemented a virtualization layer on top of that, and then run our own network telecom stack on top of that. So we're the operator. We just happen to not have any infrastructure and leverage other people's infrastructure. The idea is like we basically connect all those different networks. So we have the supply in any country, and then automatically the software detect the best network to optimize for performance and cost. And then we package that up, that instantiation of the network, as a very simple service for brand, which we call brand VNO. So it's a play on word on MVNO, if you're familiar with it. And the idea is very simple. We want to deliver the essence of telecom to brands that have no expertise whatsoever in telecommunication, yet want to build an intimate bridge with their customers. A lot of times when we talk about unbundling, the idea is to say, today, networks, if you take any mobile operator, they basically do two things. They do the network side, and they do the brand side. As we all know, as global brands are becoming more and more global, as they offer more and more services, a lot of services, getting more interconnected with one another, sort of interacting with one another, reinforcing each other. This is what MNO brands have to compete with, right? All the brands that we know about, Apple, WhatsApp, Facebook. So there's been a lot of mind share, right? And so at a brand level, as we know, a lot of customers are basically choosing based on their experience with the brand, their affiliation with that brand. And so as a brand, you have to compete with that. You have to compete with the Apple and the carrier have to compete with that both on the brand side and the network side, right? And it's creating a lot of friction in various ways. On one side, if you look at the network, what you have to do basically is deal with the financial pressure of the capex required to build a network. So I'm based in New York, for instance. So in the United States, a tier one operator deploying 5G will deploy about $150 billion worth of capital to deploy that network, right? And you want to contrast that with new networks that potentially a lot cheaper. Elon Musk this morning was talking about Starlink. Starlink is $10 billion to cover the entire world, right? $150 billion to cover 5G in the United States, $10 billion to cover the entire world. So you have this pressure as a carrier. Second, you're dealing with government. Governments have very much understood that connectivity is essential, needs to become a human right. So they're very much pushing infrastructure providers to open up their assets. They are putting new open network access rules, so on and so forth, right? So you have this pressure from the government as well. And third, you have to deal with the competition. As I said, in New York, I'm on one of the tier one operators. I pay $150 a month for my connectivity, but then the cable companies are offering me $20 unlimited for the same wireless, right? And so now we have that pressure coming from other areas of the industry as well. And then on the brand side, you have to deal with customer becoming a lot more sophisticated, wanting a lot more sophistication. They want the service to be flexible. As we're talking about brands, the mindshare as well has changed, right? A lot of, if you compare the NPS of a typical consumer good company or a brand like Apple compared to the carriers, there's a big difference there, right? And as we're saying, the brand is what's driving loyalty, is what's driving adoption. And finally, you're under pressure also from all the other brands basically building that mindshare, and so kind of getting a little swamped in this whole area. So what we're doing, just in summary, is basically to say, networks are great, right? It's very hard to build a network. That's an expertise that very few have, and we're happy to work with all tier one carriers. But typically, it's a job in and of itself to build a network, right? And then what we want is basically dissociate the network on one side that provides good connectivity to people to the brand that eventually will service the end user, right? And I explain how we do that. Second, as we we're just mentioning, generally users and consumers are dissatisfied from their current mobile providers for various reasons. As we all come from telecom, we understand that this industry has been built on breakage, where we want to sell you more than we're actually end up using. If you look at the plans from typical carriers, it's a Chinese menu. So the value proposition has not been really simple, right? And it's one of these areas where everyone else is trying to make their service really seamless and frictionless. And then when you get into the realm of carriers, it gets really complex for the end users. So a lot of them are just not happy. And finally, the third point, and that's really something that's really close to our heart here at OXIO, is that the reality is like most people are not connected, or at least not reliably connected. So we spend a lot of time in emerging markets across the world. And what you'll find is people are sporadically connected at best, right? And the main reason for that is cost. And the cost problem is actually really hard to solve because if you think about a market, say Brazil, compared to the United States, the cost of deploying a network in Brazil is exactly the same as the United States. Yet the ARPU, the average revenue per user in Brazil, is about like 1/20th of what you have in the US, right? So the carriers have this massive infrastructure cost to deal with, but basically they are outpricing the population. So the model that we have today of just buying subscription every 30 days from a carriers or on a prepaid or postpaid model needs to evolve, right? And we need to create new business models that come from those brands, from the enterprises that we all know and love. Now, in order to do that, you need to be able to create value on the other side, right? And how do you effectively transition the wireless experience from the telco we know today to brands that will deliver it in the future? What's in for them? What's in for the end user? What value are you able to provide? And that's basically what we worked on at OXIO. And the answer is Telecom BI. BI standing for business intelligence. It dawned upon us that in a world where all the marketers, the brands, the enterprises are competing on the basis of what they know about their users, how to personalize the service, how to customize the experience. And think about Netflix, think about Amazon, how much they know about you and try to make the proper recommendation. That's the race today. That's table stake for all these companies. And if you think about it, as everything transitioned to mobile, the wireless operator is in a position to actually have all that really rich information about the users and be able to really understand at a much deeper level what those users are all about. And this is the key, essentially. That's the secret weapon that we're bringing to marketers. By effectively analyzing all the information that you get as a network operator, right? You know where the phone is at all times, you know how the device interacts with other devices, you know what apps are running on the device, you know all the various traffic consumption patterns. There's a lot of like millions and millions of small signals, effectively, that you get as a mobile operator. And down on us that you are actually able to transform, there we go, transform that data into valuable insights for the brand, right? This is something very valuable to them. So now you can know where they shop, where they like to go, how much they spend on various things, how they commute, how they communicate with friends. And the idea here is to do it in a privacy-preserving way, right? The idea is not to necessarily like start mining the private information from users and passing that to the brand. I'm sure they love that. What you want is basically to say, we can understand what makes a user, like what makes a market, getting all those low-level signals, turn that into something valuable, yet without compromising privacy, right? So we're not decrypting the traffic, we're not looking inside the application, which really at that point puts the burden on data science, building machine learning models, doing deep data science to be able to turn that into something valuable. And that something valuable is going to be different for different type of customers. If you're in retail, that tends to be more around competitive intelligence, market intelligence. If you're in fintech, that data is used to drive financial profiling, credit scoring, risk assessment. If you're in the end-demand economy, a lot of time is to drive and understand the corporate user or the users at a deeper level to be able to drive loyalty and really personalize the experience. And all of that comes from the telecom data. And that's why we're saying today that, if you think about all the data sets in the world that are so powerful, right? Like what Google is sitting on, what Facebook is sitting on, we're saying that telecom data is on par with that. Like from that information, you can open up a whole slew of business intelligence that will drive the KPI for the brand. And because now they're able to see value on their side, that in and of itself allows the service to be subsidized, to be cheaper. Like as we're saying, a lot of people are prepaid, they're not connected, they typically don't have the money to buy more data. So can we offset that cost by basically providing value to the brand on the other side? And that's what we're doing. Especially today in a world where the gatekeeper on the device, right, the Android and Samsung, for good reasons, are very much restricting what a brand is able to get. It's also very difficult to start reconciling information across silos, right? You have information here about a user, you have information here about another, is it the same one? And the telecom identity is what ties all those things together. So all of a sudden that becomes a secret weapon. It's basically creating value on the customer side so that you can offset the cost of the mobility service to the end user, and while providing it as the vehicle to collect all the information for business intelligence. So we've been working across industries. Highlight 3 here where we had a lot of success. One is retail. We do a lot of deployment in emerging markets. In emerging market, a lot of the retailers have been sort of the proxy for carriers as far as telecom services. A lot of people buy their top-ups and their service directly from the corner stores as opposed to mobile operators. And a lot of those retail businesses are therefore very well suited to offer their own branded telecom service. They tend to sell the phones, so they pair it really well. But where the value lies for them is the ability to drive digital payments, for instance, the ability to transition from really being a physical business towards an e-commerce business, and they want to know where you're going, right? And if you're able to repurpose some of those dollars that are being spent at a competitor retail location and bring it back into your ecosystem, that's value that's created for the retailer. That in and of itself allows them to offset or subsidize a portion of the connectivity so that you bring that information to them, right? As I was mentioning before, fintech has been a very strong area for us as well. We've seen generally the conversions between financial services and telecom services. We see a lot of carriers becoming banks, banks offering telecom services. And so the pairing, the bundling of financial services and telecom is natural, right? So you're almost having a dual play type of service that drives loyalty and retention, enhance the digital experience. You can build loyalty, say, hey, if you spend dollars on this, you'll get data on that side. If you use your data, well, you'll get discount on the other side. And mostly, if you think about emerging markets, where a lot of people are still in a cash economy, brands, retailers don't have a whole lot of information about their users. Why? Because you cannot really ask the credit card companies to start giving you information about purchases, for instance. A lot of them don't necessarily have, a profile that you can mine from Facebook. And so, whereas in a developed market, you might be able to call a service like Equifax to understand the credit profile of a user. In those markets, what we do is we use telecom data as a proxy to drive the financial profile or risk assessment of a user. And there's a lot of models that have been built on top of that. But basically, that becomes the bridge to driving. And obviously for them, that allows them to reduce their bad debt, improve their repayment rates, and really start tailoring the right financial product to the right customer. And finally, we do a lot of work with on-demand economy, right? So we think about the Uber, the Rappies of the world, where they employ massive amount of drivers, delivery people, and telecom service is a tool of trade. That's how they work. That's how they make money. So here it's the ability to offer a better service, right? Because you're able to straddle all of the different networks. So by definition, you have better connectivity at all times. We're drastically cheaper from a cost standpoint. So it's more data at a lower price. But the value for those companies understand those drivers, understand why, as we all know, a driver that straddles multiple mobility apps will select to take a ride from Uber versus a ride from Didi or from Lyft. They need to understand that, right, to refine the service and make the program differentiated. And the value of that is dwarfing the cost of telecom, right? And that's basically what we're trying to do here is create this asymmetry in pricing where creating new commercial model on the brand and enterprise side, which typically are orders of magnitude more valuable than the cost of data becomes the vehicle, the connectivity becomes the vehicle to acquire that data and build this new commercial model. The big question now is, a lot of those companies have no telecom expertise. They don't want to acquire telecom expertise. So there's a technology gap that needs to be filled, and that's basically what we're doing. The reason why we compare it to Stripe is, if you remember like 20 years ago, the business of collecting money on the internet was extremely complex, right? You got to get gateways, you got to get PCI licenses, you got to get a whole bunch of stuff. And then Stripe comes along, you drive 5 lines of Python into your website, and all of a sudden you're able to collect payment. You don't have to do anything about financial services, banking, or whatever. So we're essentially trying to do that exactly for the brand. So as I was mentioning, the idea is to say there's a lot of infrastructure here, a lot of vendors around this conference hall building all kinds of network. We work with private network, wholesale network, government network, commercial, tier 1 carriers, Wi-Fi operators. And basically, if you get a SIM from one of our partners, let's say from Uber, that SIM is able to start moving around between different operators, right? So it would be like you're one time at lunch on Vodafone, 2 hours later you're on Orange, later you're on Movistar, and then it's obviously all seamless for the end user. So that's why we're saying it's the best network, because by definition, we use the Venn diagram of all those different network operators. But connectivity is only one thing, right? In the business of telecom, there's a lot of other things that you need to do with customizing my SIM card or my eSIM, with distributing them. Who do I call if I have a problem? What about regulatory environment? So basically, the brand VNO service takes care of all of that for the brand, right? The idea is to say, you just decide how you want to market your service, what plan you want to offer to your users, what are the bells and whistles that come with that. Do you want to do WhatsApp Unlimited, you want to zero rate your own application, and you leave everything else to us. We operate that as a service, which ultimately creates the perfect partnership. As we were saying before, the brand are very strong in multiple areas, right? They have the mind share, they have the distribution, they have the marketing chops, they know what to do with BI information. That's their job to please and delight the customers. Our job is to help them with everything else, basically taking care of the network, the connectivity, the branding, the regulations, anything that you might need to implement a service. And the reason why we're doing that now, we can both focus on our core competencies. They focus on their customers as a brand. We focus on telecom as a supplier. And we've automated all that technology, so we're able to set up a branded MVNO in a couple of minutes. And having a programmatic network means that we can do anything in software. There's no permission or permit to get from any of the carriers. We control the entire telecom stack, so we have unfettered access to all the low-level data for BI. So we're in control of our destiny at this point. It also doesn't mean that the carrier is not getting anything out of this, right? The carriers are getting much higher margins, right? Like we buy a wholesale, we pay them to carry our traffic over to our cloud environment. For them, it's ability to capture consumers that they might not otherwise capture in various different segments. And for the brand, obviously, this is this intimate bridge to users, right? Instead of being an app on the device, they become the mobile operator. They get access to unprecedented business intelligence, which fits their business, which allows to create new commercial model that eventually will help subsidize some of the data. And obviously, there's revenue at the end of the day for them as well, right? So we've created this sort of ecosystem where OXIO, by being able to package up telecom, put it behind an API, we're turning telecom effectively into a technology tool which delivers business intelligence. And if you're able to do that, as I was mentioning, you can create value on the brand side, which then will subsidize. A good example, just working up here, there's a company that capture all the signals from people in their cars, and to understand how people are driving, they're selling that, packaging it up, analyzing it, selling that to an insurance company, and then the insurance company is subsidizing the cost of connectivity for the collection, right? That's exactly what we're doing, is to say, where's the value? Insurance company is able to understand driving patterns a lot better. Pharmaceutical company are able to understand social determinant of health, for instance, to be able to drive their research and their supply chain. Retail companies are able to drive e-commerce, digital payment adoption. And if you're able to do that, then we make telecom better and cheaper. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you so much. Please, yes, come and join me on the Cloud City sofas. Thank you so much for, always safety first. Thank you for sharing your experience with us on this topic. I think unbundling telecom and the message of being both a network and a brand is so powerful. There are a few things that you mentioned that I wanted to touch on, and you were obviously very emphatic about the use of the word brands. And let's talk about some of the brands that you're currently working with, perhaps outside of the telco space, who are delivering this successfully. Can you give us a few case studies?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of retail brands. For instance, in Mexico, we work with Circle K, Coppel, which is sort of the equivalent of a Walmart. Work with companies like Uber, for instance. Bimbo, which is a Mexican company that does Wonder Bread in the US. It's very big. I know the name sometimes, a little interesting. But the idea, and what I love about it is, those are brands that don't know anything about telecom, right? That demonstrate the value of what we're doing, because if someone understands telecom, then it's almost cheating a little bit. But if someone comes in and say, I understand the power of telecom, I don't know anything, and then a week later is able to launch their mobile service, that's a real value for us. That's a big win.
Okay, that's interesting. So you have mentioned a couple of other industries, retail, fintech as some examples. I wonder, what do you think the telecom industry can learn looking into what other industries have done with this, either things that have gone really well or things that haven't gone really well? And how as an industry can we build on that to drive our own innovation?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is this concept of virtual operators existed for quite some time, right? It's we've seen a number of attempts. The problem is it's never been very, very successful outside of the very few. because ultimately there's no differentiation, right? You resell the product from an existing network. You don't really learn from it because it's a black box, and so that has created, an industry where basically you had to have consolidation. On the other side, we see companies like Apple, for instance, they've been able to vertically integrate. They sell you the phone, they sell you services, they sell you the apps, they sell everything, right? And so the last leg for them is basically to own that mobile connection. The problem is now you're dealing with 900 carriers around the world, and how do I make that happen? There's technology gap, there's complexity. And so the idea was really to say, as consumers today, we all like different brands. Maybe some people shop at Walmart, some people are using WhatsApp all day long to communicate. You might be a United or Delta kind of loyalty member. So the brand affinity that you have will eventually lead to you getting your mobile service from those brands.
So do you think that this can really give carriers that competitive edge?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's a global world. I spend a lot of time talking to carriers, and they are a local player at the end of the day. Like, they're mighty and powerful, and they might have hundreds of millions of customers. But if you compare that and contrast that to, say, WhatsApp on the other side that has 2.5 billion customers, or you get a TikTok on the other side that have 1.6 billion, right? That distribution, that global element will not exist. So carriers have a part to build into that, but they need to kind of fall into a structure that allows them to be on a global level.
Okay, interesting. And you said right at the start that you leverage existing networks.
Right.
Why is that important, that specifically?
Because it's actually really hard.
Okay.
The work that carriers are doing is extremely important. It is a certain expertise in building network. Like, that's why I always kind of scoffed when the government wants to build network, because absolutely no expertise there. If you take a company like Verizon that's been building networks for 40 years, right? Like, the kind of expertise that they have, or Telefonica or any of those companies, it's actually really hard to do, and it's very complex. And that's why it's really hard for them to do both things at the same time. Is build a really great network on one side and also be a really great brand. If you think about it, it's hard to do two things at the same time, right?
Okay, so almost like a collaboration.
It's a collaboration. And then for us, what's exciting is there's all kinds of technology are coming out, right? Like, we have 4G, we have 5G, we have Wi-Fi 6 coming out, we have different type of mesh networks. So the idea was to say, at the end of the day, for a consumer, data should be fungible, right? You want to download something, don't really care if it comes over Wi-Fi or cellular, you just want to get it, right? So you can use the diversity, you can use sort of the different cost structure of those different networks, and then basically provide the best of all of them.
Okay, great. And so I think it's impossible to say that when we do change and we migrate and we have innovation, that there's not going to be some additional challenges along the way. Does becoming a mobile carrier as a service bring about any additional challenges that we might not be seeing when we're not using that model?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and that's why we try to take care of everything else around the technology, right? Because at the end of the day, it's still like a new industry for, if you're an airline provider or if you're a retailer, like, you don't have that expertise. So there's certainly some friction that needs to be solved. And so what we said is, like, don't worry about distribution of SIM card. Don't worry about the branding. We'll take care of that. So we try to alleviate some of that, but there's still a little bit of a learning curve for sure, right?
Yeah, I imagine. I think it seems that you have probably quite a lot of conversations with your clients about kind of how to overcome these challenges and how to embark on their journey. We see the telecom industry, as you said, on the verge of a seismic structural change. Let's say we've got some brands and carriers in our audience today. What advice do you have for those organizations wanting to stay ahead of that shift and avoid being outpaced by the speed of change around us?
Yeah, I mean, not giving advice to anybody, but no, I mean, at the end of the day, right, it's focus on your core talent, right? Like, I think in telecom, there's always been an envy from the other side, right? Like, 10 years ago, we could have that conversation about how Google and Facebook are stealing all the revenue out of the industry, yet we're carrying the traffic over our pipes. Well, you're the pipe. You selected to be the pipe, right? So at the end of the day, like, there's always been like some envy to control everything, whereas they're sitting on something that's extremely invaluable, which is the network, and no one's going to compete in that space. And we're starting to see carriers doing that, right? Like, in the States, for instance, Verizon, as recently as 3 months ago, dubbed itself network as a service, right?
Okay.
Right? And so that tells you that they want to work with the FedEx and UPS to build private networks. They want to work with the Amazon. They want to work with those companies. So they understood exactly their place in the equation. And then I think the DNA needs to change if you want to go into another industry, right? Like if you look at, AT&T, for instance, acquiring Time Warner and HBO, you don't come from being a telco person to being, a movie honcho overnight, right? Like, and so that DNA is hard to change. And so if you look at companies like Jio in India, for instance, what they've done is there's one company that takes care of the network, there's one company that takes care of services. And the DNA of the two teams are very, very different, right? And so I would say probably taking a hard look at where they excel, and then if they want to do other things, get some expertise there.
It's interesting because even with so much technology around, we still always go back to the fact that people are so integral to driving this innovation. I find that really quite interesting. So I just wondered, obviously you mentioned that network as a service. Is it too soon to call this NAS? Are we there yet?
I don't know. It's actually hard to name it because connectivity as a service kind of exists already. Communication, telecom. I mean,
okay, we'll work on that.
I think we're trying to settle on telecom as a service, but
TAS, you heard it here first. TAS is the buzzword of 2021. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about data. Now, we talked in the introduction about how telecom data is a really valuable commodity, and you've described it as the holy grail for brands globally. But we know that users are becoming more privacy conscious. So how do you balance that with acquiring data, but also being aware of the fact that most of our users don't want to give it to us as much as they might have done in the past?
No, it's a super good question. And that's something we spent a lot of time on because we ended up making privacy sort of like one of the top features of the platform. Because it's easy to look at something like this and think that you become like a data broker of private information, right? And obviously would be sort of foolish in 2021 to try to build a business like this. So the idea is there's multiple things, right? Like the user needs to understand exactly what they're getting into, what their data is being used to. A general rule is that everything is anonymized and there's no API. Like very clearly in our company, if a customer say, we had requests, like, I want to see all the WhatsApp messages, I want to see all the Google searches. Yeah, it's a big no from us. Like we're not doing that. Okay. And after that, it's opt-in. It's the right to change your opinion, and understand what happens next. Right. So a lot of times, your information is collected for what, right? Because we don't want to preclude. Part of what we're trying to do is creating value on the other side, so the data gets cheaper, right? So that more people get connected. So you can pay with your money or you can pay with your data. So we don't want to preclude users from paying with their data as long as they understand what they're getting into. Yeah. But there's a lot of things that we don't share. For instance, we could get the GPS information on the phone, which gives you a precise location. Do we really need to pass precise location on the other side? No. So we get it from triangulation from the network, which is good enough on the other side. Right?
Okay, so privacy is always at the forefront.
Privacy is like a top feature. It's actually, especially in emerging markets, sometimes challenging to make people understand because they're more likely to want to share and maybe change their mind. They feel like you're being tracked. So that makes the job harder, right? Like 20 years ago, you open the traffic, you look at what's going on, you tell the other side. Now you basically have to correlate multiple signals to turn that into something valuable.
Yeah, no, it's certainly more tricky. And you did mention a couple of times government. So I'm wondering, how important do you think it is for the telecommunications industry to collaborate with governments to support this innovation?
I think it's crucial. Multiple ways. I think what government, so we work a lot in Latin America, for instance, right? And what government has come to realize is that if their people are not connected, the country as a whole is falling behind, right? You just don't have access to the same sort of services and ability to communicate on the go and so on and so forth. And then for historical reasons, you have, incumbents that have a large share of the market, the prices are pretty high. And so what they've done is they basically say, you have an infrastructure and you need to open it up to guys like us to be able to create more competition, more services, more ways of monetizing it. So generally governments have and I think if we're projecting it, like it's going to come to a point where government's probably going to deem connectivity as being an essential human right? Because it should be. Of
course.
The trick after that is to work with the telcos to be able to make it happen. And I would say in the US, when I reference this $150 billion cost. One thing the government could do is make that cheaper, right? Just from a spectrum standpoint, right? Because the prices that we get as consumers is just a reflection of what carriers are spending ultimately. So,
Thank you so much. That's all we've got time for. A huge thank you for coming along. And thank you to Nico for sharing his insights with us today.